Mr. Korberg?
Here.
Mr. Spivey?
Here.
Mr. Turner? Mr. Turner? I think you're still muted.
Nope, I'm actually unmuting myself. I don't know why you can't hear me. Can you hear me?
There, we can just barely hear you.
Beautiful. Hey, I'm in the parking lot. I'll be there. Here, though.
I'll keep with roll. Mr. Baines? Mr. Baines? Mr. Baggett?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, a quorum of the Board of Education is present, so the regularly scheduled meeting of March 1st, 2021 is called to order. We'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and face the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Tonight's agenda has been previously distributed to the board. A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to approve the agenda as submitted unless there is a motion to amend. Hearing no motion to amend, we will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como? Aye. Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. We have one public speaker registered for the evening. It is the policy of the board to provide at its public meetings an opportunity for individuals to address the board. Comments about individual staff or personnel will not be allowed. Open meeting law prohibits the board from engaging in discussion or responding to matters not included on the agenda. All speakers are reminded the same policy limits your time to speak to 5 minutes. This limit will be strictly enforced. May I ask the superintendent to keep track of the time and to notify the speaker when time is running out? You are also asked to give your name and address at the beginning of your time for the public record. Our speaker tonight is Carrie Jones.
I can say my name and address right away? My name is Carrie Jones. My address is 1522 Caledonia Street in the Crosse. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm a mother of a Logan High School and a Logan Middle School student, and I'm here to let everyone know that there's a crisis brewing. And I'm not talking about COVID. The crisis I'm talking about today is our youth. Our children are suffering because we have failed to fully reopen our schools. We have failed to provide a consistent learning environment and instead have abandoned our children to learn in isolation, independent of adult supervision and guidance. Students' mental health has suffered, many have had falling grades, and our youth have tuned out and lack motivation. I'm here tonight to advocate for a 5-day-a-week in-person learning at the high school and middle school levels, and to demand answers for these children who have been left behind. Schools all over the world have safely reopened, so why can't we? My first concern and question is, what are the exact parameters for reopening our high school and middle school to in-person 5-day-a-week learning? These parameters, once defined, should be clearly understood by the school and by the community at large. In order to move forward, we must define these expectations for in-person secondary education. I know that there are barriers to fully reopening our schools, the main barrier being the 6-foot rule. But the 6-foot rule is not a rule. It is a recommendation given by the CDC and our local health department. Other schools have chosen to safely reopen by using the World Health Organization's recommendation of 1 meter. This alternative could safely allow for more in-person learning. My second immediate concern tonight is for the schedule or lack thereof at the high school. The schedule that the high school provided was only applicable for approximately 1 week out of the month. Parents and students have had to coordinate a schedule that is never the same. We have had to consult with multiple calendars every day just to know what time our students should be logging in or leaving for school. This is just a further disruption that makes it all the more difficult to establish routines that we know our students thrive on. We need a set schedule for the high school, the same that we have developed for the kindergarten through 8th grade. My third immediate concern is for the high school's choice for an open campus and virtual work Wednesdays. Right now, students are struggling more than ever to keep up with work and to attend their classes. This is a time when many students need extra attention and guidance, but instead they have been told to stay home and to catch up on work independently. The school should be reaching out to students with failing grades. Open campus and virtual work Wednesdays should be reserved for students who are doing well academically. Conversely, students who have fallen behind or who have failing grades should be provided in-person learning where teachers and staff can provide the support and the guidance so desperately needed. When can we expect a return to closed campus and stop wasting our time on virtual work Wednesdays, excuse me. Parents have been told to be patient, and we have been, but that time has passed. Our children are suffering, and there is no more time left for so many of them. We have to act now before one more student falls behind. So let us move forward by defining the expectations for fully reopening our schools in person 5 days a week. Let's immediately develop a schedule for the high school that is the same every single day. And finally, let's rethink our open campus policy and virtual work Wednesday. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. We'll now move to consent agenda announcements. Are there any consent agenda announcements?
Mark, Mr. White has some, and followed by Ms. Everson.
At your place tonight, you should have in front of you a little tan-colored sheet that indicates to you that 12 of our district teachers at the end of the first semester had earned their master's degrees, 8 at the secondary level and 4 at the elementary. So we congratulate them and wanted to provide you with their names so you know of the accomplishment that they have made. Tonight on your agenda, you see 4 retirements. I will talk to you about 3 of those individuals, and then Stacy Everson will tell you about the 4th. The first individual tonight retiring is Tammy Barron. She's part of a powerful husband and wife combination, retiring from the district. And Tammy started working in the district in 1989. She's worked her entire career, all 32 years in the middle and elementary schools here in La Crosse as a teacher. She's been at Summit, she's been at Longfellow, and most recently, and as the school had opened, at Northwoods. So one quote that I thought was good that was in a recent evaluation said that students know and can tell that Tammy is their advocate and see her as supportive. She has a great deal of patience and remains calm and collected, even during difficult behavior issues. And that can happen, and she certainly is all of that for sure. Paula Sharon, an art teacher. She started in the district in August of 1991. She's been with us 30 years. You can see some longtime employees tonight. She's been an art teacher at Franklin, State Road, Hamilton, and most recently at Longfellow. And a quote from her, she is a team player, flexible, and willing to try new things. So we will definitely miss her there. And the third retiree I wish to speak about tonight is Sarah Olson, and she has been with us 25 years, since 1996, working as a cook. She's been at Jefferson, Central, and most recently at Logan. I thought the quote was a very good one and very apropos for one of our food service workers. It was written that she works at high speeds and is super efficient, yet still maintains safety. That describes what's needed in one of our school nutrition positions. So I will defer and let Stacy tell you about our 4th retiree.
Good evening. So it is my distinct honor to recognize Joe Barron this evening. In talking with Joe recently, I was especially struck by the love and the admiration that Joe expresses for our schools, our city, and our community. When Joe reflects upon his experiences here in the school district of La Crosse, he does so with such utmost respect for our students, all of you, his colleagues, and the community members he surrounds himself by. I felt goosebumps today as Joe shared some details about his career with me that I'm about to share with you. Joe has served our school district of La Crosse for over 35 years. In 1986, Joe started his career here as a freshman football coach for Logan High School. And although Joe is a native of St. Paul, Minnesota, he described the family feel of Logan High School that we all still hear about to this day is one of the reasons that he felt compelled to stay here and build a career. And speaking of family, Joe met his wife, Tammy, that Mark spoke about. They met here, fell in love, they settled, and they created a family of their own. When Joe reflects back on the educational experiences that his children received here in the school district of La Crosse, he does so with such pride. He's very proud of the education that his own children have received here. In 1990, Joe was hired as both a social studies and a math teacher at Central High, and he continued to coach multiple sports, football, softball. And in 1997, Joe was hired as the third ever activity director for Central High School. Joe refers to his current position as the activity director as his dream job. And I felt goosebumps again as Joe described how he prepared himself with such vivid memories back in 1997. How he prepared for mock interviews that he set up for himself and anticipated questions and asked people for feedback. And he was offered the position, and so we are so lucky. Joe went on to earn his Activity Director of the Year award in 2009, and he also served on the State Board for Activity Directors for over 10 years. I have the impression that although the complexity and the stress level of an activity director's position is very high, Joe doesn't view his job as work. Rather, he viewed it as an honor and a privilege. This is what great educators are made of. I will miss him tremendously, and undoubtedly to me, I can tell that he has modeled how dreams come true for our students and for our colleagues. I hope that he continues to tell his story, his legend of his career here in the school district of La Crosse, because he will continue to change lives. So, Joe, we will miss you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Everson. So the consent agenda is a mechanism used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. Are there any items that members want to remove from the consent agenda? I need a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Mr. Turner to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented. We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como? Aye. Mr. Jimenez? Aye. Ms. Leahy? Aye. Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey? Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. We'll now move to the board consent agenda.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Mr. Turner to approve the items on the board consent agenda unless there are any items that members want to remove from the consent agenda. Hearing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como? Aye. Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy? Aye. Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey? Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. We'll now move to the information portion of our meeting, and we'll begin with the Achievement Gap Reduction Report.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight's report is Achievement Gap Reduction, the AGR report. This is a report that is required by state statute twice per year. So I make the joke that it's such a great report that we do it twice during the year. It's not really a good joke, though. So Ideally, we will find a way to weave this into our results policies, but right now it is a standalone informational item that I'll do in winter and then also at the end of the year. We use AGR, it's a state program. We receive approximately $2.4 million from the state of Wisconsin, which we in turn use to reduce class sizes from grades K through 3. We are compliant in two ways. One is by doing this report and collecting the data that I'll share tonight. The second is by having instructional coaches in each of our elementary schools. Tonight's data is, I think this will be a reoccurring theme for me this year. It's interesting. This is one of our first looks, I think, at universal screener data. I'd like to talk about some of the considerations when you look at this type of data. And I'm especially looking forward, I think, to spring because we'll see a little more consistency with the in-person environment. First of all, typically what we use is a combination of our universal screener, which is a computer adaptive screener. In the past, we've used STAR that we do in person, and students come in it's computer adaptive, so they're able to get their score out of level. It's very helpful. We can use it for many instructional purposes. However, we can't give it at home. So our data this year, we were able to use the universal screener data we usually use, so we had to be creative. Another local assessment that we have is the DRA-2, which is an individualized one-on-one assessment, which we gave for the first time in a virtual setting. There are some reliability issues that go with doing an assessment in a virtual way for the very first time, where the students are at home. Some of that data might reflect that a little bit. So I am really interested in seeing the spring-to-spring comparisons when we do take the assessment again in the spring. Another difference is for the ELA. Typically, we use the universal screener data solely for this report, but in second and third grade, we use the DRA-2 for all students, where typically in the past, we only gave that individualized reading assessment for those that were below benchmark on the universal screener. So this is our first time with a whole grade level with the DRA-2. So that's a change for us too. On the math side of the house, our assessment, once again, was that STAR, that universal screener. And once again, in a remote setting, we did not apply it. Instead, for the AGR report, what you are looking at is the math benchmark. And this is a locally created assessment. It's standards-based. And we applied it, once again, in a virtual setting, which is new. We also focused on essential standards. So our standards work, we prioritize what we believe to be the essential standards, and that was our focus in the spring, and again in the fall for instruction. So this assessment wasn't the full battery of the math benchmark assessment we would give our students, but rather focus on those individual standards that were prioritized. Looking forward, our AGR contract with the state of Wisconsin expires this year. So this spring provides us a new opportunity, and some of the things that we'll do in that is make sure we bake in or work in to the AGR report disaggregated data, the same that you would see in the other results policies. So you can expect that going forward. The second is our choice of assessments will change. We will remain consistent amongst our elementaries, so we'll use the same tool throughout, but that tool may change. So in the spring, I should be able to report on the update on that because the AGR application is due June 30th. So that'll be part of the second part of this report. Looking at the data, there's a couple interesting things I'd like to highlight. I think when you look at longitudinal data like you're looking at tonight, that year-to-year comparison based on the season is how I might recommend you approach it. So if you look at winter of 2018 for our kindergarten students, 78% of our students were at benchmark. In 2019, 74% were at benchmark. In the winter was 56% at benchmark, which constitutes an 18-point drop from our year-to-year. Some of that might be a new cohort of kindergarten students. Some of that might be giving the letter sound assessment to a kindergartner student in a virtual format. And here's I thought, a curious aspect of the data. If you look at the fall of 2020, when we gave this assessment, we were at 53%. So these are new students to the school district of La Crosse for the most part, and to see a lower score there, proportionally compared to some of the other fall scores, is interesting to me and makes me think or believe that the testing environment may have something to do with it, although it's likely not a sole factor. If you recall the last results policy that I shared, we saw about a 10-point engagement drop per grade level at the elementary when it came to class participation percentages. That would probably be a more accurate of representation of our learning loss or not yet learning. We'll find out more in the spring when we have a better testing environment. For the first grade, you can see we had about a 13-point drop at this mid-year point from year to year. On our math assessment, we saw a 9-point drop of our kindergarten students. In the fall, it was a 12-point drop, so some ground was gained from year-to-year comparisons. And then our math benchmark, as I said, was a new assessment. Normally, you would see our computerized universal screener. We did not apply that, so that's why you don't see longitudinal data for the second and third grade ELA and math. However, you will in the spring be able to see that winter to spring growth. That is the AGR report. Do you have any questions for me tonight?
Questions for Dr. Lahecki? Dr. Lahecki, you answered my question about the disaggregation of data, so I appreciate that. Thank you. We'll now move to the Operational Expectation Monitoring Report, OE10, Learning Environment.
Good evening, everyone. So the OE10 was last before the board in September. That's when you approved interpretations and indicators. So tonight we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into some of the evidence for each of the indicators. I know you've had the report for several days. Still, given that, I'm just going to quote what this OE is about. This quote unquote, the superintendent will establish and maintaining a learning environment that is physically, socially, emotionally safe, welcoming, inclusive, respectful, and conducive to effective learning. So when you say that out loud, clearly it's foundational, it's a bedrock to Dr. Lahecki sharing results. All the results that we create are born out of an effective learning environment. So tonight it's going to be a spotlight on a lot of information. At times it might feel a little bit drinking from a fire hydrant, but you know, we'll pause at portions and discuss a little bit and ask if there's questions. So with that, I'm going to turn your attention to 10.1, where our indicator reads, 95% of students respond affirmatively to an annually provided survey instrument indicating feelings of safety, belonging, and encouragement at school. So we created a survey. In fact, members of the board were instrumental in helping us create that survey better than a year ago when we initially were going to launch the survey. COVID stymied the initial launch, but this year we were able to do that back in February. So it's for just shy of 2 weeks, we had that survey live. Nearly 2,500 students, 3rd through 12th grade, took the survey and participated. The survey itself was about 13 questions plus additional demographic questions. The board is going to see the full survey in July when we provide the annual pupil non-discrimination self-review report. But for tonight's data, we focus on 3 questions specific to safety, belonging, and encouragement. These are broadly recognized by the Wisconsin DPI, safe and supportive schools, as protective factors. The first question, and hopefully you've been able to click into the link of the survey, 91% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, I feel safe at school. Our indicating benchmark, again, I'll just remind you, is that 95% of students would respond affirmatively to that question. As an additional note, I will just say that because this is the first year of this survey, we do not have longitudinal comparative data. Generally, we'd like to share, if we could, at least 3 years of year-over-year data or longitudinal data. But in lieu of that, a comparative analysis was done with district and county and state data with youth risk behavior survey data. Many of you are familiar with YRBS data. I will tell you that for that same mirrored question, I feel safe at school, the school district La Crosse school climate survey data, if we look at 86%, now some of you will say, well, you just told us it was 91. When we peel off just high school, because the YRBS is just our secondary, or just our high school students, we're at 86%. The school district La Crosse is actually 10 percentage points higher than we were when last we took the YRBS, which was 2019, our last results, and we are 5% higher than the county and 3% higher than the state. I'd also point out to you the asterisk at the bottom of the chart. It states, students self-identified race, ethnicity, special education services, and language spoken in the home. I highlight that just to say that this is not skyward data. So parents will oftentimes have the option of 2 or more categories, for example. In this was totally student selected. Students had the options to select whatever they identify most with, and as many different categories as they felt. And so the data will not align. For example, if you've seen data from Skyward, this will not align perfectly with that data. In the second question, I feel like I belong at school. 85% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed. Again, our indicator benchmark is 95% responding affirmatively. Comparatively, I will tell you that School District La Crosse, the climate survey for high school is at 80%, 16% percentage points higher than the county. Also 16 percentage points higher than where La Crosse was in 2019. And 19 percentage points higher than where the state of Wisconsin was in 2019. So while not meeting the benchmark, considerably higher. The third and final question, adults at my school encourage me to do well. So 95% of respondents agree or strongly agree, of course matching the benchmark. And again, similar to the last question, our survey 16% higher than the county and 16% higher than where the School District Crosse was in 2019. 9 points higher than the state of Wisconsin in 2019. I'm going to just pause right there. Any questions about the student climate survey?
I do have a question. So I'm reading the cover letter that goes with it, and you note that there were 2,499 individual responses from students. And are we to read that's the number of students that took this survey?
That is the number.
Okay.
Yep, exactly. Any other questions about the survey itself? And at the end, obviously, we'll have plenty of time for more questions. All right, moving on then, let's take a look at there's various indicators in 10.2, starting with indicator 1, where we note the Code of Rights and Responsibilities is reviewed annually by the board. The evidence includes a couple of live links, one to the board's last review, July 15th of 2019, and the approved annual work plan. An appropriate question probably at this point would be, well, if it's reviewed annually, where's the 2020 review? This last year, GC6E was still, quote unquote, under construction. And at that point, we didn't know if it was going to be a separate standalone report to the Board of Education. So to say that, though, I would also say that in a couple moments when we get to indicator 4, you're going to notice that the hard work and the good work of feedback from the community, important stakeholder groups, was done throughout 2020. So that while we didn't report to the board that year, we were doing good work and creating good feedback opportunities. In indicator 2, we want to make sure the Code of Rights and Responsibilities is clearly known and visible and accessible. We have included another live link to the code in multiple languages, and the return to in-person addendum is present there as well. As you click on the link to the evidence in indicator 3, you'll find it is in keeping and it precisely follows what Dr. Engel presented to the board in his comprehensive report on November 16th, 2020. Specifically, our data indicates the school district La Crosse disproportionately disciplines via exclusionary discipline practices such as suspension, which is what this indicator is examining, our students of color. A variety of efforts are underway to address this data, including what you're going to hear next in the very next report by our superintendent, Dr. Engel, with the district strategic plan for equity. In indicator 4, the superintendent or designee, in this case Kurt Teff, regularly convenes stakeholders to review the code of conduct for suggestions, updates, and feedback. He includes a presentation as part of that connection. So both the groups he connected with, over the last year, and the presentation itself is included in the evidence. Before we move on to 10.3, we'll pause here for a moment, see if there are questions.
I'm gonna get some water, but.
I think we're okay to continue, Dr. Harsey.
10.3 is our focus on protecting student data and information. We start each year updating student data directory information. The link you will find in indicator 1 takes you to the form that we utilize. We send notification of the form each summer. This year, the data directory form was made available from July 1st to September 18th. And then also, we supply the form to a new enrollee as they enroll into the district. The form essentially allows parents of the district to tell us what data directory information they want disclosed. I will tell you this, as society has changed, so has this form. It's continued to evolve. For example, the media section at the bottom of the form is relatively new, and it's really born out of the growth of social media. If parents or guardians have a change in their situation or their data directory decisions, if they change throughout the year, we accommodate those changes. I will highlight here that when we spoke about OE10 in May, we had a discussion as a board about the process for reporting concerns if a breach occurs or if there's just a general concern, and that needs to be communicated regarding student information. To that end, I'd like to update the board that we've updated our student records policy so building principals are directly involved. And we've developed a new comprehensive umbrella complaint policy that would serve as a catalyst for review for any concerns or complaints as well. In regard to 10.3 indicator 2, not a secret to many of you, being in a location with several institutes of higher education and some incredibly vibrant medical facilities, active community organizations, the School District La Crosse is a highly attractive option for conducting research, and individuals from the aforementioned organizations are regularly reaching out with requests. Indicator 2 in 10.3 demonstrates the district's diligence in protecting our students while also supporting research that can be mutually beneficial to the district. Our Research and Development Committee is chaired by Dr. Lahaki. The evidence supplied includes links to vetting documentation and names and dates of approved research over the last year. And I will tell you that there is lots and lots of research that is highly scrutinized and vetted, and there's some amazing work that's been approved, and there's lots of work that you don't see that shows up there that just doesn't make it to the finish line. I'll pause again for questions. Any questions at that point?
Dr. Harsey, are these listed here, these are all requests for student information for the purposes of research only?
Exactly.
Thank you.
That's right. Thank you for that clarification. 10.4 allows us to ensure that every formal report of misconduct by an adult are investigated by an appropriate member of the administrative team. The attached documentation letter aligns with Administrative Policy 4110.4, indicating any unresolved issues be reported either directly to me, to our Director of Student Services, Ami Zabrowski, or to our Director of Human Resources, Mark White. During the time period of March 1st, 2020 to March 1st, 2021, there were no documented complaints for formal appeal. I just want to be clear, that doesn't mean that there weren't any complaints or concerns. It means that they were handled at an appropriate level. These were for appeal, so they were addressed at a previous level. And finally, in 10.5, the indicator for the superintendent addressing behaviors on school property or at school-sponsored events is specific to policies and procedures for responding to concerns and ensuring applicable policies are on a regular review cycle. To that end, the evidence provided includes the policy review cycle that we currently utilize, the aforementioned 8700 umbrella complaint policy that's been developed, and several related policies associated with harassing and/or discriminatory conduct. I've given you a lot here in a short period of time going through this. We'll stop there and ask if there are any questions, but that is the totality of OE10 learning environment.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, so at the top of the page 1, it indicates in compliance. Obviously, this is coming forward as an information item right now, and we're not voting on it. But Dr. Engel, did you check that it's in compliance, or is that Dr. Harsey check that? Just so I first of all understand the protocol.
Yeah, I don't think we're at a point to check in compliance or not in compliance until after we've had this meeting, addressed any concerns. That checkbox would be premature at this point.
Well, that was my precursor to my second question. Was I was curious as to why that was checked, but then there were no checks in the document. So,
Yep.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Actually, because I had a similar question, but only because when we talk about 10.2 forward. So when we talk about like when it's checked in compliance with the exception or checked in compliance, how do we know? No. What's the percentage that you have to meet in order to be in compliance? Does that make sense? What I'm asking? Okay.
For indicator 3, the discipline data, Dr. Harsey, what did we choose as our benchmark for compliance? Was that the 95%? Or
In the
for the discipline data, yeah.
We didn't select a range for discipline data. We made
That's
we made the benchmark for our student climate survey.
Yep, and Dr. Harsey and I actually discussed that the other day as we were going through this policy. What's the appropriate variation? So if you're within 5% based on the student population of the proportionality, if it's within 10%, we discussed that. We didn't come up with a particular benchmark, but at some point you'd have to know if you've made it. Some of it's kind of an eyeball test, you know, it's about right, but also, you know, we would want to know when we've reached success. I would say at this point in 10.3, for that indicator, we would say no, we have not met that benchmark, but we also wouldn't have defined what success looks like yet either.
Mr. Spivey, if I hear your question correctly, are you asking sort of about the process of how we arrive at those indicators?
Yes.
Under our governance model?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be whatever the indicators are that Dr. Engel provides us with how that's going to be measured. So that would fall to the responsibility of Dr. Engel and then for us to agree whether or not, given that is a reasonable interpretation of what we'd asked for. But I think if there's a concern that I'm reading, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I also have just a concern that there's a lot of process here, as opposed to like actual metrics data. And I'm thinking about even the most recent communication from Randy and Linda about boards have a tendency to have a lot of process that's brought before them. And so that's something that I'm thinking of as I'm looking at this too, as opposed to here's the actual benchmark that we're looking for, and here's what we came up with. I don't have anything to offer in terms of specific piece without kind of going through that, but that was just sort of my take on it. So I'm thinking about, for example, the last indicator on here, that we have policies and procedures in place for these things. And I guess I would look to you, Dr. Engel, as to whether or not that is the reasonable indicator for that, just that we have it, or that there's 0% violation of it.
Yeah, so Dr. Harsey and I talked about this one too, and we were talking about that. Is this a process indicator? Is it an outcome indicator? And so then we went back to the measure, the OE 10.5, which is the superintendent may not tolerate unruly behaviors on school property, etc. So what does it mean to tolerate unruly behaviors? And how would we measure that? You know, on one hand, you could say if it happens at all, we've tolerated it. That we know that it's developmentally appropriate to misbehave as a child sometimes, to do something that's out of character, that maybe not in keeping with what we want kids to do. So we know that it's going to happen. We accept that. So then what is tolerating? It means that we address it when it happens. We seek remedy as we move forward. We try and help students grow and move forward. And so then how do you document that? And what does that look like? On the most policy procedural end, we have policies in place to address it. The other end would be maybe we've documented and listed every single encounter and the appropriate, and then the subsequent response by the school district. We know that you don't want to see all 6,000 behavioral incidents and their consequences. We also know that maybe just the policies themselves are maybe a little too thin. So I think as we are going through this process with the board and the administration, we're trying to figure out what that balance is, to figure out what will not tolerate unruly behaviors means. And so I think that's just what we're struggling with right now. Like, what does that look like? What would make the board, as overseers of our district, feel confident that you're monitoring our progress? And what can we reasonably provide that would give you that information? So I think there's a couple points where in the newness of this process for us, we're still kind of struggling through it.
Okay, so to that point, have Brandy and Linda been consulted on reviewing the policy and perhaps providing some guidance for the board and for the administration on this?
Yeah, we can revisit the guidance that they've provided. I think in some cases, they don't have much better advice.
Sure, and I'm thinking about, as opposed to, I'm talking about reaching out to them personally, because since they work with school districts across the U.S., there may be a model for that.
Absolutely, we can do that.
That might be helpful.
This is one that we, as we're doing right now, we struggled, particularly with 10.5. We were racking our brains. So we've got friends from Wisdom sharing both, in our trip to the coast and around the state that we can, obviously lean on and ask for support. But that one was more, of any of them, that was the one that we did some mental gymnastics on. And we didn't know if we'd come here and then the board would say, that's exactly what we're looking for, or we can do better.
So I would also say the same with 10.31 for me as well. When it comes to that, like, back to that question, is it just we did it, we gave it out, or is it any type of assessment of, and there's another one like that too. When I remember it, I'll yell that out too. But is it we gave it out, or is it, are we checking with parents to make sure they understand, like, this is what this process is? Similarly, if we were to talk to students and say, like, do you know who the superintendent is, right? Like, is that a part of the process, or do we just assume that they know? You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's just kind of what I'm thinking about as I'm processing through this.
It sounds like from what you said, Dr. Harsey, too, that there is now a process in place for how to gauge that, right? You said that it was updated in the administrative policies. In which case, I think that might help answer this question, because then you would actually, is that something that can be used there as an indicator?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, are we talking about having the policy as a piece of evidence so you can see that process?
I think we have a a more robust complaint policy to track complaints and go through all that. But I think to your point, Mr. Spivey, if we don't reach back out and say, did you understand this? We may present it, but like the Code of Rights and Responsibilities, but you're right, we do not turn around and say, did you understand the Code of Rights and Responsibilities before you ever encounter it?
Right.
So there is a gap there in terms of passive, we presented it, the procedural type stuff, versus active, did you understand this thing when you encountered it? A potential opportunity there might be when there's issues related around the Code of Rights and Responsibilities, when we're working with parents, when those situations arise, we could ask at that time, as opposed to just before they've ever encountered it, as like a quality control measure. So, did you understand the Code of Rights and Responsibilities? Were you aware that this type of behavior wasn't tolerated, and we're going to work through it as we move forward? That would be a potential opportunity, I think, to get that active understanding.
I could see that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we'll have parents or guardians sign off that they've reviewed the code with their child. That doesn't necessarily mean there's understanding involved. Correct.
Any final questions or comments for Dr. Harsey before we
Yeah,
move
so I
forward?
got a question about the definitions, if you will, the terms. I'm trying to interpret it, and I see a few things pretty redundant. So for instance, like unruly and disrupt learning, who came up with the definitions for these two? And do we see the redundancy in both of them? Because unruly actually says the behavior that disrupts, and then we have disrupt learning, and I kind of feel they're the same. So like, who came up with these definitions, or the interpretations of these, if you will?
Yeah, before we presented these to the board in September, we worked with DeForest and Sun Prairie and our friends that we met when Wisdom Sharing in California. And it's really kind of and some of our own work. And so it was kind of a piece together from a lot of different sources, folks that traveled down this road before us.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harsey.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, then last item on the information portion of the agenda is the strategic plan for equity.
And I'm presenting that today. So this is the culmination of about 6 months worth of work. As I came into the school district, looked at developing a strategic plan, and my goal was for that to relate around educational equity, to bring up all students and give each of them what they need to succeed in our school district. I had conversations with a whole host of folks within the school district, outside the school district, various groups within our community to understand educational equity from a variety of perspectives, and tried to synthesize all of that into a cohesive document that would be able to guide us in our work in education here in La Crosse. This plan is rooted in the school board's policies. There's a clear mandate for us to work towards educational equity from the school board's perspective, and in our administrative policies as well. So it's rooted in our policy work from the start. The plan revolves around 5 areas: educators, knowledge, skills, and dispositions, the curriculum, systems of support, district and building leadership, and community collaboration. And these are all interconnected, and if we are able to create robust systems for each of those, hopefully we will be well on our way to educational equity. There is a graphic on the back page, the last page of the document, that outlines how it connects to a theory of action. So our goal as an educational institution is student achievement, and we feel that with instructional quality, and if our students are ready to learn, they'll be able to reach that achievement. And I think of student achievement in a variety of ways, not just academic, but social, emotional, and in other ways as well. And how can we provide that instructional quality and students ready to learn? By focusing on rigor, relevance, and relationships. And we won't get into those definitions, but focus more on the educational strategy. So educators' knowledge, skills, and dispositions has a lot of different individual factors. And specifically as it relates around equity, we need to understand a fair number of things in order to have that background. So for knowledge, it involves content knowledge. You need to know what you're teaching, of course, but also the history of marginalization, oppression, and racism, institutional oppression and racism, stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, microaggressions, cultural competence, deficit thinking, and implicit bias. As we understand these things, we'll understand our students better that are in front of us and be able to interact in a way that builds relationships and ensures that they're ready to learn. The skills our educators need, instructional pedagogy, basic educational strategies, leadership, inclusion, co-plan to co-serve to co-learn, universal design for learning, de-escalation strategies, equity literacy, and culturally responsive teaching. And a lot of these are relatively technical terms, and the document kind of goes into what each of those mean. But ultimately, we want educators at all levels to be able to work with diverse environments in their classroom in an inclusive way, and be able to identify, react to, respond to, and address issues of oppression as they show up in their classrooms. And then dispositions. And I think for me personally, this is the most difficult area and takes the most time and attention because it's how we feel about things. And a lot of those things are affected by our upbringing and our culture and society. But we want folks to have high expectations. We want them to be positive, reflective, collaborative, authoritative. We want cultural humility to approach new cultures in the right way, to be anti-racist, and to be trauma-informed. And I would couch that as anti-oppressive as well. It's not just about racism, it's about all forms of oppression. From there, we need to look at our curriculum. There are some basic mechanical portions of the curriculum that lead to a more equitable educational system. Understanding by design is backwards planning and thinking about the outcome in mind from the start. Grading for learning. The best grading practices will allow all students to be successful. Representation is incredibly important. Students need to see themselves in the curriculum, in the hallways, in their teachers. Student voice and choice. When students have a say in a democratic way, it leads to more engagement. And social and emotional learning. We need to educate the whole child so that a student has all of the skills they need to be successful both in the classroom and in the real world once they graduate and move on. Systems of support. These need to be implemented in a culturally responsive way. Professional learning communities are about how our teachers work together, that collective teacher efficacy, which we know is very important. Multi-level system of support, often called response to intervention, but it's how do we provide academic scaffolding to help students succeed with what they have now to where they need to be. PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports. This is a way to support students in managing their emotions and their feelings and their behaviors, and we need to do this in a culturally responsive way. We need to involve families. We need to understand the different ways that behavior manifests and be sensitive to cultural differences there. Mental health framework. This is something Mr. Teff is working on and Mrs. Zabrowski to build up a robust framework for helping students navigate their differences as it relates to mental health and providing a series of supports so that they get the assistance they need when they need it in our schools to be successful on a daily basis. And then restorative practices. As we've discussed in other places, we have an over-reliance on punitive practices, and we need to find ways to move away from those and build up our restorative practices so that we create positive relationships in schools between teachers and students and families. District and building leadership. We need to look at our policies and procedures. An example of that might be a district-wide reporting process for incidents of hate, bias, or microaggressions, so that on a broad scale, people have a place to provide that feedback. Data analysis. I think that we've been relatively transparent, as we saw today with our data, disaggregating it. We need to continue that practice. Continuous improvement. We need to continually seek to get better, and we need to systemize that so that teachers and administrators have a process to follow to continually look at ourselves, reflect, and grow and get better. Coaching is an important strategy. It's one of the most effective ways to help educators improve their practice, especially as they operate 90-95% by themselves. So providing intentional coaching to help folks get better is crucial. And then a solid professional development plan. And we've got a great team that is already taking this and trying to make it actionable so that we look at each of these elements and ensure that on a routine cycle, folks meet benchmarks, have the support they need to grow. And then lastly, community collaboration as a strategy. Family engagement is crucial. Schools have a history of family involvement where it's unidirectional. We send out the newsletter, we invite them in for parent-teacher conferences, and we just want their support, but without maybe their voice. And so a shift, as we've already started to make in this school district through a lot of the work through our Project Aware grant, is community engagement. We want input both ways. We want more involvement from our parents in how our schools work and are structured. Cultural outreach. We need to continue to reach out to large cultural groups in our school district, as well as new folks that show up to ensure that they feel a connection to our schools and that we are properly responding to their needs with our education. And then collaboration and coordination with community groups. We have an incredible wealth in our community of advocacy groups, of cultural groups, and one of the things that I found as I talked to all of them is they want to be involved, they want to help, and we need to create a more systematized way to facilitate that engagement, to bring them in, to hook up our students with those resources so that students feel supported in the schools and when they're out of it. This is not a small amount of work. It will take years to accomplish well. We will be developing benchmarks for success at the classroom and school building and district level, and arranging our professional development around it, our staffing around it as we move forward. It should guide all of our work. That being said, nothing should be produced and then tabled and then set in stone. It is also subject to change as we learn more. I am sure there's pieces in here that I missed or things that don't strike the right chord with some, and so we are always open to improvement and making things better. And we might get 3 years into this and say, yes, that element does not belong here, or hey, we missed this element and it needs to be included. And so it's a living document, but also will be the guiding document for our school district.
Questions or comments for Dr. Engel about the strategic plan for equity?
It made me think. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning one morning thinking about this after I read through some of our documents. We talk about wanting to have parents come into our school and feel welcome, and we want kids to come in and feel welcome. And this is a hard thing to say in front of a bunch of educators, so please forgive me. But have you ever thought of something called, and it's a term I just came up with, educational oppression, where if you walk into a school, you might not want to talk to that person because you have to call them doctor or something like that. They've earned it, don't get me wrong, I'm not, but it's something where they have a title that makes them kind of feel above you, you know. It can be intimidating. So it's something that I think that as much as you celebrate that education, you also have to realize that being smart, quote unquote, is intimidating. So I think that is something that we might want to consider as we're looking at this. And I know it's, like I said, it's very hard to say to educators, but you have to look at the different perspectives, so.
No, and I would say we're acutely aware of that issue. We know that a lot of our students and, I wouldn't say, hopefully not a lot, but some of our students and certainly some of our parents have had negative experiences in schools, and those are traumatizing places. And the prospect of going into a school building for a parent-teacher conference is scary and anxiety-filling, and we know that that's why some parents don't show up, because they have had trauma as it relates to education. And so we want to create environments where that's not the case, build those bridges so that they do feel more comfortable. And I think one of the advantages of our Zoom parent-teacher conferences this year is we saw more engagement than we've had in the past. And it's potentially because that educational oppression has been lowered because they don't feel that anxiety about coming into a building where they did not have a good experience. I know that we've had, when I was a special education director, we had many of our meetings off-site at libraries or other places, restaurants, so that the parents felt comfortable in their own environment where they felt like they had some power and they felt like an equal participant in that setting. So I think we are sensitive to that, but that is just definitely something we'll note as we move forward. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Engel at this time?
I would like one thing to be considered. First off, thank you for doing this, as always. I think any time that we are able to, as a district, bring forth equity in education, I'm always for it because it needs to happen, right? Historically, we know it hasn't, and it's kind of time for us to change and chart a new territory and a new route. My question for you with this is, are there timelines or some more details that will come along with this particular document before we vote on it next week?
I don't believe it's an item that would be voted on, so to speak. It's kind of our administrative mission based on the school board's policies. But you will be getting regular updates as far as our criteria, our benchmarks, our assessment for success, how it aligns to our professional development. I am curious for any feedback, though, in terms of elements that are missing, places for improvement, thoughts.
I guess for me, when I look at it, I like what it says, it's there. For me, in order to actually see it work, I need to see the details or like the timelines of what does this actually look like. It's a great guiding document, but then it's kind of like, well, where's the work that falls with it?
Absolutely. This is a 30,000-foot view.
Right.
This is not fine detail. Yeah. My guess is that by summer, we will have pretty granular detail as to like what it looks like in a building, what it looks like in a classroom, a whole host of resources that we intend to make available, strategies for engaging in some of these things. I've already seen initial drafts, and I think that that's the sort of thing you're probably looking for. Like, that's very nice, but what you going to do about it? So we will have that, and we'll be able to share that probably by the end of the school year. And then that will drive our professional development, our PLC work, our day-to-day interactions as we move forward. So in the next 3-4 months, I'll be able to share out those specifics that show that we're actually going to follow through.
And those are things that ultimately should be coming before the pieces of that should be coming before the board have to do with the monitoring reports. So since obviously, as you mentioned, the board's policies are what are serving as the foundation, I would expect that it's not so much that, oh, appreciate the updates, but ideally then it would be integrated into those reports. Yes, that's kind of the direction that you're thinking of.
Yeah, the challenge will be to find out where some of those things fit into in terms of results as opposed to process or procedure. Because once again, a lot of this is, like, these are the things we're going to do. It should show up in students feeling engaged. It should show up in student test scores. It should show up in closing achievement gaps. Like the end result should be how students feel about school and how they perform at school. So demonstrating all the stuff we're doing to get there, will probably be supplemental reports or an informational item, just so that you're aware that this continues to be a focus.
And I think that's something that will have to be decided in terms of like how that ends up on the agenda or not.
Exactly.
Right, yeah, okay. All right, so if there are no further comments or questions, yes.
Just one. I appreciated the response to Dawn's question about, how people feel comfortable in school and that sometimes it's a traumatic experience to go back into that space. So I guess my question would be, well, it's more of a comment, but the question I would want to keep in mind is who's missing, right? So as you are gathering this data and as you're looking at how do we make changes, it's great to get that feedback, but who's missing from giving that feedback? And that is just as telling as it is getting that feedback. So, just something to consider, who's missing, who has not been heard, and then gathering that information.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Jimenez. We're now going to move to announcements. Mr. Baggett, do you want to be in?
Sure. All right, so I have 2 groups for you. Firstly, private school has done excellently. I've been years that have exceeded expectations. Most things I were expecting. Excellent. I've even heard testimony from Geneva Cup walking through the halls. She hasn't had a single person test their math to keep that social distance. And because of the excellent, we've been able to move our 5-minute passing time to a 10-minute passing time because Geneva administration wasn't worried about students like grouping together and socializing and breaking guidelines in the hallways. Students were doing such an excellent job and are doing such an excellent job that we're able to have a little bit more time, hopefully actually be able to use the bathroom between classes. And then my second announcement is that just today I put out a survey for Q4, whether we should stay with the cohort model, whether we should move to everybody trying to come back to school 5 days a week, whether there should be an online option, and that went out to all Logan students and parents, and I will have the results for you probably Wednesday night or Thursday.
Laura, did Mr. Baines join us? Okay. All right, Mr. Korberg.
Just one update from the Education Foundation. You will recall that we've been talking a little bit about the Random Acts of Kindness endowment or Forever Fund. The Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration they've decided to give $25,000 to the Random Acts of Kindness Fund, and they've also given a $25,000 challenge grant. So if we can raise $25,000, obviously, we'll get another $25,000 on top of that. And so that's that's an exciting news for that fund. And you may recall that we're getting close to the goal. It's right around $400,000. And so if you haven't given and you want to give, now's the time to give because your money will be doubled. And it's rakforever.org, or just go to the Education Foundation website and you'll find out how you can make a donation. That's what I have from the foundation. Oh, and on Monday, too, of course, hopefully I will see some of you at the grants events at the 4 different buildings throughout the district.
Thank you, Mr. Korberg. My announcements are that next week we will be meeting here in person again. There will be a workshop that follows, just as there is tonight. And I'll remind you as we get closer to it, but the first meeting in April, we won't be here because this is a polling site. So, all right, Dr. Engel.
Just a few announcements. First, Governor Evers has submitted his budget to the legislature. So if you're interested in legislative advocacy, now is a great opportunity to start communicating with your legislators. If you have any interest in knowing how that budget will interact with our personal school finances, we will certainly have some of that information as we learn more, but I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to go through how that might impact the school district and if you're looking for talking points, to talk to your legislature, however you feel about those budgetary items. Vaccination, we're working closely with the county on vaccinating our educators. It's been a good collaboration, but a lot of last-minute developments, and so we're hopeful that this week we'll get a large percentage of our staff vaccinated. It's exciting, both through a mass vaccination clinic and then also working through the health systems to try and maximize our opportunity for our educators. So that's exciting that we are able to start that process. And then we are looking at 5 days a week for our middle and high school students. The key, though, really is what are those parameters for return, those benchmarks, and then some stability with those. The key difficulty, as identified by our speaker earlier, is that the 6-foot distance leads to a contact tracing requirement. And so if you have students that are inside of that 6-foot distance and they're around somebody who tests positive, then you would have to exclude them for school. And if you have more of those folks, that's more of a disruption. And we are sensitive to not only all of our students trying to come back, but also if we're excluding other people's children as a result of this decreased limit, that would have an impact. Currently, as it stands, we've had very few cases of COVID at school. We've seen no student to adult transmission at all in our contact tracing efforts, and so that is very exciting. We want to keep up that success. We want to keep kids in school, but we also know that most students learn best in person. Most teachers want to teach in person, and we're going to do everything we can to get there. So we are looking at parameters and benchmarks. We're going to work closely with the county. We're going to look at the guidance that's out there and come up with something in the near future.
So just so I'm clear on what you just said, so if we are less than the 6 feet away and there's a case, it's more likely we would have to send people home than but if we can keep it 6 feet apart, then there's a more likely chance that the students can stay at school without having to quarantine if there's a positive case.
That's correct. Right now, since we have the 6 feet between students, when we have a positive case, there may be 1, maybe 2 students that also have to quarantine for the 2-week period.
Okay.
If we have less than 6 feet of space, it might be 20 to 50 that might have to quarantine for each positive case, depending on the arrangements of those rooms. And so that could become more disruptive than simply being in hybrid on a 2-day-a-week schedule. So
That's helpful, thank you. Are there any other announcements before we move to agenda planning?
Actually, can I ask a question?
Yep.
The near future, what does the near future look like? And are you looking at 5 days a week for the remainder of the school year for middle school and high schoolers, or?
A possible option that we've thought about is fourth quarter. That would be a natural change.
Sure.
That being said, we still have to identify what these exact parameters are. If you go back to where we were in November, it would have been 1 case a day on average, in that green for the Harvard Global Health Institute's model. We're still a ways away from that, so that would be a potential benchmark. Vaccination of our staff and our community would change things drastically. If all of our 65-plus folks in our community and our educators are vaccinated, we would feel as though there's less of a possibility of transmission to a vulnerable population, but we know that not everybody who's vulnerable falls in those categories either. Sure. So those are some possible parameters that we could consider as we move forward.
Thank you.
All right, any other announcements before we move to agenda planning? Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the March 15th, 2021 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Second.
A motion's been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by, I think, Mr. Turner and Mr. Menez were at the same time. Mr. Turner, to approve the March 15th, 2021 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections. We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Connell? Aye. Mr. Jimenez? Aye. Ms. Leahy? Aye. Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg.
Aye.
Mr. Spivey. Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye. All right, the meeting is adjourned, and I'll give everyone 5 minutes to take a break, use the restroom before we begin the board workshop.